Morning on BBC One, and with only 4 days to go, what's on Laura's mind?
Well, here we are, 4 days to go before you decide who walks through that door on Friday. It started in the torrential rain, Rishi Sunak's surprise summer election. His rival Keir Starmer has played it safe to try to stay ahead. But Rishi Sunak is not done. He will be with us live this morning, fighting for your votes and fighting for his job. Labour's campaign chief, Pat McFadden, is here along with Daisy Cooper, deputy leader of the Lib Dems. Now, there is another big contest going on as well as the election, the football, of course. Daisy, you going to have time to watch England-Slovakia tonight?
I think we'll have it on in the background, do some emails at the same time, yeah.
And Pat, I have to ask you, as a proud Scot, who are you supporting?
I'll be watching the England game with my kids.
And who are you supporting?
Oh, of course I want England to do well.
There you go. Well, Flynn, the Westminster leader of the SNP, will be with us too. And what is the state of the race? Professor Sir John Curtis will give us his 60 seconds on Sunday.
Rishi Sunak's party on 20% still trails Labour on 40% by 20 points. Exactly the same as at the start of the election.
But, of course, nothing is decided until the night itself. So to talk about everything that's going on, the Greens' Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, of course, also a famous chef, Harriet Harman, the former Labour Cabinet Minister, and a former Tory Cabinet Minister, Brandon Lewis too. Welcome to you all. And morning, and welcome to a special 90-minute programme on the edge of the election. Let's start, as we always do, with the news. There is no hiding who the papers are backing now. The Sunday Telegraph and the Mail on Sunday both splash with their warnings of what they think a Labour government might do. The Mirror and the Observer coming out for Labour, no surprise there. The Mirror urging its readers to be on the right side of history. The Sunday Times doesn't give it away on the front page, but on the inside it does say it is time for a Labour government. But the Sunday People reminds us of that other big fight that's going on. Of course, they feature the election, Keir Starmer alongside Harry Kane on the front page. Let's start then with our panel. It has been actually quite a wild campaign, hasn't it? Harriet, what do you make of how this has run over the last 5 weeks? Because a lot of people say, oh, Labour have been a bit dull, they're playing it safe.
Well, I think that it's really been a very diverse campaign because the Tories has been very negative, all about challenging Labour, all about trying to not talk about their record. And I think one of the most interesting statistics is that apparently 90% of the Conservatives' social media is dedicated to attacking Labour and only 10% of their record. But out on the street, people are thinking about what have they actually done. But actually, however fed up they are with the Conservative government, unless they feel confident in Labour, then they wouldn't do that. So Keir Starmer's campaign has been about, this is what we're going to do. We aren't going to do that, but we are going to do this. Be reassuring, and then just reminding people, if you want change, you've got to vote for it.
Hugh, what have you made of the campaign?
Well, I think from Keir Starmer we've heard a lot more of we aren't going to do than what we are going to do, and the Tories have stumbled from one misstep to the other. It's almost like they're trying to wrestle a souffle into the oven to see if they can get a rise out of it.
And you, of all people, know how hard that is.
Well, yes, but they can't even get to the oven door without dropping the souffle on the floor, and I think there's probably room in the next 7 days for another souffle mess. You know, let's see what happens. That's why I've enjoyed being out with the Greens, who have an incredibly positive campaign and actually have the gumption to say, you know, to reform our frontline services, we're going to have to pay for it. And we're still prepared to talk about a more equal society, which is an idea that Labour seems to have pretty much given up on.
And we'll talk about that a bit later on in the programme with you. But Brandon Lewis, you were a minister in successive Tory governments. I mean, that issue of the record, how hard do you think it has been for Rishi Sunak to escape the fact that he's leading a government after 14 years? And a lot of people would say the natural pendulum swing has been against him all the way through.
Well, there's always been a view that there's a cycle to politics, and there's a reason no party's ever won another term after that period of time and that many terms in office. So it is challenging. There's no getting away from that, and particularly when we... Well, I think there's a few things. Obviously, since 2019, there's been some real challenges with COVID, Ukraine, things like that. And I think, actually, I would just say just two things that struck me in this election. One is, I think, at times we've all been distracted by some of the things like Farage's comments on Putin, abhorrent intolerant comments, I would say, that we've seen from some places have taken some of the air out of the policies, and we haven't heard too much from Starmer. And the other thing, touching on what Harriet said actually, is I think the social media has played in a way we haven't seen in elections before, both the spend on it and the way that social media has spread messages, both, as we've seen overnight, ones that unfactual ones that I warned about before the election, we have to be careful about this, but also the messages from the parties and how they've run through social and digital media.
But just briefly to both of you, do you feel though, Harriet, as a politician with many, many years of experience, do you think that the big challenges for the country have really been addressed here, or actually the campaign's been a bit narrow?
Oh, I think people out on the streets, on the doorstep, are in no doubt that we need to rebuild the economy, rebuild public services, and also rebuild trust in confidence in democracy. And actually, they appreciate that Keir Starmer is saying, we're going to get to work right away. You know, if you vote Labour on Thursday, we'll start work on Friday. But it will take a while to sort everything out.
There has been a lot of criticism for Labour for not being explicit about everything and not actually going on some of the big issues. I mean, Brandon, do you feel that the huge things we face, whether it's, you know, AI or climate change, these big generational challenges, maybe they haven't been part of the campaign?
No, and I think I'd have liked to have seen Keir Starmer on the show today explaining what he's going to do. I think there is, and I've seen this on the streets, a real gap in understanding about what Labour's actually going to do and how they're going to pay for these things. And that is a real issue, I think, in the days ahead.
All right, well, let's get on with our first interview of the day. We are going to try and feature some of the subjects that maybe haven't been talked about as much in the campaign as you might expect. Security and Brexit. The Prime Minister will be here soon, and we did, of course, also invite Keir Starmer to come today, but he declined. We are, though, joined by his campaign chief, Pat McFadden, who will be with us in a couple of minutes after a long and busy few weeks.
That opportunity for change is what this election is about. This is an election which is all about change.
Change. This feeling that, you know, the adults are in charge.
Quite nice, actually. They just want me excluded from Parliament.
Are you sticking to the line that no decision has been taken?
She's free to go forward as a Labour candidate.
Labour will put up your taxes.
We will not raise income tax.
We certainly won't be increasing income tax.
We will not raise national insurance.
Or national insurance.
That is a manifesto commitment.
Your taxes are going up if he is in charge.
When you said Jeremy Corbyn would make a good Prime Minister, did you mean it?
I didn't think we were in a position to win that election. My dad worked in a factory. He was a tool maker. My dad was a tool maker. He worked in a factory. It's true.
Are you going to win?
We're certainly not complacent. We take nothing for granted.
Well, you've nailed that script, haven't you?
Well, they're just a glimpse of some of the campaign events there. Pat McFadden, welcome to you this Sunday morning. Now, alongside a few laughs on the campaign trail, whoever wins next week is going to have to confront some extremely serious issues. And if Keir Starmer wins, he'll be on a plane in a matter of days to a NATO summit in Washington and then hosting a huge summit of European leaders here in the UK. And not so long ago, Keir Starmer said national security is the most important issue of our times. Why then has he not committed to spending 2.5% of GDP on defence?
Well, he has. And he was, in fact, saying that before Rishi Sunak did. Two things I'd say about it. First of all, the last time defence spending was at 2.5% of GDP was when Labour was in power. Conservatives, of course, have been in for 14 years, have had 14 years to reach that figure, have never done so. Now they say they want to do it. We actually said before they said that we wanted to do it. But there's another point about this too, which is, like everything, we want to show financial responsibility about this and make sure that we can pay for it. And I think one of the features of this campaign, which we've had some criticism for from some quarters, is showing a significantly greater degree of financial responsibility than the Conservatives.
The point about defence spending, though, is you haven't committed to a date of when you would spend that money. And anyone in Westminster, anyone in Whitehall would tell you, and would tell our viewers this morning, that without a date, that is not a meaningful commitment. So why has Keir Starmer not given an explicit commitment with a date to spend 2.5% of the size of the economy of GDP on defence? If he really believes that national security is his first priority, it's the most important thing, why has he not made a political choice to put that at the top of the list?
Because a date without a proper plan to pay for it is also not a meaningful commitment. And I'm afraid that when I look at the Conservative manifesto, I see a desperate wish list of unfunded commitments, and the money for them the Chancellor has admitted,
and we're going to talk to the Prime Minister shortly.
So
and
what's
as everybody
the point?
in that chair,
what is
Pat
the
McFadden,
point in
as
producing
everybody in
a
that
date
chair has
if
in
you
the
don't
last few
say
weeks,
how you're going to pay for it?
I'm just going to make this point to you. As everybody in that chair last week, our viewers have told us very clearly they want our politicians who are here to stick to talking about their own plans and their own policy. And I'm asking you why Keir Starmer has made the political choice not to make this commitment, because you have made commitments to some things, but not to this particular target. Why?
Because he wants to show for everything he commits to exactly how it's going to be paid for. And after the experience that we had just a couple of years ago, we see the cost of making commitments when you can't do that. And the cost isn't paid by politicians, isn't paid in interviews like this. The cost is paid by people in their own family finances. So we want to be responsible
he has made a
for
commitment
everything
to spend money
that we
on
do.
some other things, and it is interesting that he's chosen not to make a commitment to this increase to defence spending, even though at a time when he says in his own words, national security is the most important issue of our times. This is a big year for elections, and if Keir Starmer wins, of course, I know he always says that he would want to work with whoever is in the White House. But all of our viewers would have seen President Biden's performance in the debate in the US the other night. Are you concerned for Joe Biden? Should he step aside?
Look, I think it was a tough night for the Democrats the other night, but I've got one election to worry about, and I'm focused on that. And whoever wins the American election in November, the relationship between Britain and the United States will be as strong as it's ever been. And it's for the American people to decide who they elect as their president.
But it is a real time when there are elections going on in so many places. There's voting in France today, and there's concern among some in France that Marine Le Pen's party may win, a woman that the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lamon has called a fascist. Why should people believe that a potential Labour government could work well with the French government?
You have to work with whoever another country elects. It's a basic rule of diplomacy. I only have a vote in this country. I have to focus on this election, and whoever becomes Prime Minister on Thursday as a result of our election will have to vote or work with whoever the French elect, whoever the United States elect. This is true right around the world.
But these issues matter so much because Labour's political fortunes, if elected, will, as well as what you might want to do in government, be affected so much about what happens in other countries. We all have felt that because of the war in Ukraine that resulted in an energy shock. Now, Labour's plan, the party's talked about it a lot, is to create this organisation called GB Energy. But a lot of our viewers have got in touch with us saying, what is it really? Would GB Energy actually be a company that produces energy that ends up being pumped into people's homes?
It's a publicly owned company that's designed to drive the investment in some of the new technologies we're going to need in the coming years, in solar, in wind, in hydrogen, and so on. And in doing so, in the government stepping up to the plate, making sure that the private sector does too, because one of the things that's clouded this debate and maybe made it less clear than it might be is all around the world, countries trying to meet this transition, the vast majority of what's spent will be spent by the private sector. But we believe there is a real role for a publicly owned company to help to make a market for some of these new technologies in a way that the private sector is holding back from at the moment. And when you do that, you get the benefit of releasing that private sector investment too.
But one of the reasons it's been confusing is because representatives from the Labour Party have said different things about this from time to time. So I'll ask you again, can you be really clear? Will it be a company that will produce energy that will then be pumped into people's homes? Or will it merely, as you suggest, be an investment vehicle, essentially writing cheques to encourage other companies to do the same?
It's not going to sit alongside npower or RWE or these companies. This is a different thing. This is a publicly owned company that is investing in making sure that we have the jobs of the future in these new technologies, that releases the private sector so that Britain plays a leading role in this transition. And the reason it's had quite a lot of support, the reason that Patrick Vallance, for example, has backed it so strongly after his experience with what we had to do during COVID, is because this transition is coming anyway. So every country has a choice. And either you step up to the plate and try to be a leader in it, or you're just going to end up buying the technology, buying the kit, and buying the advances from other countries. Now, Britain, with its great tradition of creativity and innovation, We want to be in the lead of that change, not just a customer for it.
But if it's not going to produce its own cheap energy that'll go directly into people's homes, our viewers like Simon Boyce are wondering, when will I start saving £300 as stated by Labour? You've repeatedly claimed it will save people £300 a year. How?
Because in the long term, if we have renewables, they are cheaper than relying on oil and gas. And this company will drive the transition to renewables, and renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. And if we stand back from this, we're just at the mercy of the international fossil fuel market. I don't want to stand you back.
I want you to explain in detail how you'll save people £300 a year, because that's a big promise to put out there.
Because if your energy is created by renewables, the price that the renewables cost compared to oil and gas in international markets, that is a cheaper way to do it. So it's both better for energy security and better for people in their household bills.
Actually, when you look at the workings, you have been repeatedly claiming you're going to save people £300 a year. And we've looked at this based on an estimate calculated from bills from last summer, when energy was already cheaper. And the estimate is based on an aspiration of almost decarbonising the economy by 2030. It's not even based on Labour's plans, this figure. So unless you can explain otherwise, we should point out to viewers this £300 is an estimate based on figures that are out of date and produced by a think tank. It's not even based on your own workings.
This is the payoff that people can get from producing their energy by renewables rather than relying on oil and gas. And it's based on the average sum that a household pays for energy in the current mix compared to what we could be doing in the future. And you mentioned 2030. We want to be ambitious about 2030.
But are you guaranteeing to people that they'll save £300? Because when you look at the workings, it doesn't look like you can give that guarantee.
That's an estimate based on current prices compared to what we can get to through generation through renewable energy.
So it's an estimate of what you hope we might get to in 6 years' time. So that doesn't sound like something you should be putting all over a leaflet and a poster and making a solemn promise to people in a manifesto that they'll have coming off their monthly budget.
This is a good way to illustrate the benefit of transitioning to renewable energy, because if we don't do that, we are left, as we saw a couple of years ago, at the mercy of international oil and gas prices. We're also at the mercy of who controls those fossil fuels, and we saw the kind of energy blackmail that Vladimir Putin attempted to put on Europe, and to release ourselves from that is both better for energy security and better for household bills.
Brexit has been a big issue for your party. Many people, including you, were very unhappy about it. Keir Starmer talks quite vaguely of wanting to have a better relationship with the EU and a better trading relationship in the EU. Can you tell us if anyone in the European Union who has told the Labour Party you can get a bigger deal without having to give quite a lot back?
These things are always a negotiation. I've not been involved in that. I've been running the campaign. But I think we can do better than where we are at the moment.
But what do you base that on, though? So it's one thing to say, of course, you'd like to have a better relationship, but there is a strong feeling, and plenty of people in Brussels on the other side of the channel would say this, we're not going to give any potential new UK government anything new, any shiny new presents or any better deal unless we get something in return. And that may well mean a new deal on migrants, possibly getting involved in some kind of returns deal, or bringing back some form of freedom of movement. So I ask you again, it's an important point. Has anybody on the EU side indicated to Labour there is a better deal on offer without giving something back in return?
Well, we're not going back into free movement. We're not going to rerun that argument. These things are a negotiation, but every country negotiates in its own interests. And if we entered a discussion like that and we thought it wasn't in our own interest, then we wouldn't do it. But I think the point is to try. The point is to say, can we do better than we are doing at present? Can we deal with some of these barriers to trade that are affecting so many of our businesses? I think we can. I think it's worth the effort. But of course, at the end of the day, if we were in a negotiation where we thought the end product wasn't going to be in the national interest, then we wouldn't do it.
So you can't guarantee that you'll get a better deal. I mean, a bit like the £300, that's an estimate, that's an aspiration. A better trading relationship with the EU is something that you're aspiring to. It's not something you can guarantee to any of our viewers this morning.
It's a negotiation, of course it is.
And in terms, though, of that deal, would you rule out ever putting freedom of movement up as part of a negotiation?
Yeah, we're not going back to freedom of movement.
Categorically, even some kind of deal for younger people to be able to move around or study abroad?
Keir's been clear on this. We don't want to rerun the Brexit argument. That means no grand institutional design and no return to free movement.
And if, as Keir Starmer often talks about, Labour manages to win and introduces what he terms as a decade of renewal, would you rule out some kind of big institutional change, perhaps going back into the customs union, perhaps even discussing going back into the EU in a second Labour term?
Oh, I'd like to get a first Labour term, Laura. And, you know, when it comes to the future, I think the leadership task for anybody who wins on Thursday is to make the best possible future that the UK can outside the EU. That's the leadership task. We're not going to rerun the argument.
And finally, Pat McFadden, we've had a lot of politicians, you know, showing off a bit during this campaign. That's what campaigns are about. Of course, politicians are always very welcome to try to show off in the studio. But we want to ask everybody this morning, what's a mistake that you have made?
A mistake that I've made in the campaign? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I've spent most of the campaign in Labour Party headquarters, in lots of meetings, so I've not been taking the Ed Davey risk of the water slide or falling off a kayak or whatever it was he was in. I've probably had a more sheltered campaign than people who've been out and about in the country.
But do you think Labour has made any mistakes in the campaign?
I think we've run a good campaign. I'm proud of the campaign that we've run. I think we've put forward real and meaningful change and done it with an eye on responsibility because of the legacy that we're going to get after 14 years of the Tories. But change will only come if people vote for it on Thursday.
So you can't think of any mistakes, or none that you're willing to tell us about?
I'm proud of what we've done.
OK, Pat McFadden, Campaign Chief, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our last Sunday of the election campaign. Well, let's go back over then to our panel. Harriet Harman, Brandon Lewis and Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall are all with us now. Harriet, what did you make of what Pat had to say? And there are, when it comes to GB Energy or it comes to the relationship with the EU, there are points of detail that Labour's not willing to give.
But I think that the big picture about GB Energy is there's three things. There's decarbonisation, there's bills, there's energy independence, that we need to have all three. GB Energy is the government stepping up, well, what we hope will be a new Labour government stepping up. So I think that there is that detail. I know, you know, you might quote polls and people emailing in saying they don't know what the big picture is, but I think the bones of it very much are. But I could sympathise with Pat being asked what's he going to do about America and what's he going to do about the second term, and he's focused on this term.
Brandon, what did you make of what you had here?
Well, I think it backs up what I said earlier about not knowing any more about what Labour are going to do than we did when we started. Pat would get there very clearly, couldn't even answer the question about energy costs. I come from Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth's got a big interest in the energy industry, both South North Sea, exactly, South North Sea, the transferable skills we've seen, the transformation in the last 10 years, thanks to what the Conservative government's done and our local Conservative council into supporting offshore energy, particularly wind. In Great Yarmouth, there is a big opportunity there, but we've got to be clear about doing it in a way that works for consumers as well.
But we've had an energy boss sitting in this studio telling us it was taking him 7 years to get planning to get things built. He's got money ready to go, but the decisions that the government has taken or not taken on helping people get these things going have let him down. Remember him sitting in that seat saying it?
Well, I'd say two things. One is, I think, what the Prime Minister, and I'm sure Rishi will talk about this if you ask him today, has done is correct in that trying to get to net zero in a way that works for consumers, so we don't penalise people, which actually makes people go against the whole principle of what we're trying to do. So we've got to take people with us and work with consumers and our residents. And I think that's why what Rishi has done is the right thing to do on this. I do also think we need to do more to speed up and simplify and improve our planning system. Something I was doing in government, I think we should have carried on with that, and whoever's in government after Thursday, I hope that's something they will do for both housing and for energy and infrastructure.
OK, Hugh, what did you make of what Pat McFadden had to say?
Well, I'm interested in GB Energy, but it feels really that Labour's not going fast enough or big enough on a really, really urgent transition.
Hang on, they say they'd have completely clean energy by 2030, and a lot of energy experts say, do you know what, even that is too stretching.
If you were really committed to decarbonising the economy, you would be cancelling licences for new oil fields. I think that's pretty fundamental. On the point that Brandon makes that Rishi's been doing the right thing, Rishi has rolled back on net zero in a way that I mean, in the short term, I think that Tories are going to be remembered for a lacklustre campaign and a Tory betting scandal. But in the long term, I think what they've done to net zero is completely destructive. I mean, we've lost our standing in the world. And Rishi Sunak has rolled back on net zero really to score a few cheap points in a kind of phony culture war. And it's a disaster for the green economy in the long term. So and if you ask him, he'll say something similar to Brandon about proportionality. We've got to be proportionate. The climate crisis is not proportionate. It's really urgent. And if, when you interview the Prime Minister later, he says that his approach to net zero is proportionate, you'll forgive me if I can't suppress a little howl of pain, because he really has done something that's going to be remembered as setting us back. Okay. And we've got to get past that as fast as possible.
And we're going to talk to him in just a couple of minutes. Harriet, just final word to you. In terms of the Labour campaign, though, Pat McFadden, Keir Starmer and their team, we know that they decided deliberately to play it very safe. We know that. Do you understand, though, that there are people on the left of your party, people also activists in other parties, and many people in the country who look at it and think, I wanted more from them?
Well, I think what's important is that we remember how far we've come. I mean, 2019, the last time people had the chance to vote, they voted for 162 more Tory MPs than Labour MPs. And what the team have done is reassure people that there are possibilities, there is hope, but actually reassure them that these are sensible plans. You know, people were burnt by the Liz Truss experience. They don't want wild promises. They do want hope and optimism, but it's got to be grounded in reality.
OK, all three of you, thank you very much indeed. Well, Rishi Sunak is now in the building, we hear. So, can he make a difference in the last few days of the campaign? The Prime Minister had not had much luck catching up ever since he moved into number 10 after the political carnage of Liz Truss that Harriet just mentioned. He was the youngest Prime Minister since the 19th century and the first British Asian too. Two memorable achievements, but even putting it kindly, his campaign has been hit by moments he might want to forget.
So this is it, a general election is on.
I'm determined to talk to as many people as I can across this country.
We are just yards away from where the Titanic was built. Are you captaining a sinking ship going into this election?
I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. This modern form of national service.
Why do you hate young people so much?
I'll cut your taxes, protect your pension and reduce immigration. Independent Treasury officials have costed Labour's policies.
The Prime Minister lied in the debate last night.
Be wary of this £2,000 per household tax claim.
The Prime Minister attended a service but then returned to London and recorded a television interview.
On reflection, that was a mistake.
Completely wrong.
Indefensible. I hope people can find it in their hearts to forgive me.
What did you go without as a child?
Sky TV.
I think the Tories have had the day.
He thought the policy was crap.
Higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, higher taxes, higher.
Did you have inside information when you placed your bet on the election day statement?
I was incredibly angry to learn of these allegations. This election is about the future.
Well, elections are about the future, but they are, of course, also about parties' records. Prime Minister, welcome. Your party has run this country for a generation, and over that time, people's livelihoods have become less secure. There is less faith in our public services, and many people feel that our standing in the world has also been at question. Is this a better or a worse place to live than in 2010?
No, it's a better place to live than it was in 2010. Of course, I understand that the last few years have been difficult for everyone. We had a once-in-a-century pandemic, followed by a war in Ukraine that drove up everyone's bills, and of course that's been difficult for everybody. But we've also made progress in tackling those things. Inflation back to normal, the economy growing again, wages rising, energy bills set to fall again just next week. And now we're able to start cutting people's taxes to give them financial security. So yes, of course it's been difficult, but we are now on the right track with the prospect of more tax cuts to come to give people more financial security. And that's the key choice for people at this election, building on the progress that we've made.
You told the public, though, very plainly, judge us by our record, judge us by the effort that we've put in. And over the longer term, over a long 14 years, the country has become poorer by many measures, sicker by many measures, and by many measures, public services are worse. That is the record of successive Conservative administrations.
No, I don't just don't accept that, Laura. If look at let's take education. I think education is one of the most powerful things any government can do to transform people's lives. During that 14 years, thanks to the reforms of the Conservative government, our school children are now the best readers in the Western world. 9 out of 10 schools are good or outstanding, a huge improvement compared to what we inherited. Those reforms were all opposed by the Labour Party, and you can see the contrast. If I could just finish answering your question, you can see the contrast very clearly. Where Labour are in charge of education in Wales, you haven't seen that improvement. So I'd point to that as evidence of actually enormous progress in transforming the life chances, particularly, by the way, of the most disadvantaged children.
And those figures, which we've heard many times from Conservative ministers in the last few weeks, the progress that has been made is, when you look at them closely, partly because other countries have fallen behind, not necessarily because primary school children in England have leapt ahead. But the sentiment in the country, I suppose, is what I'd like you to address this morning, because we don't want to trade statistics for 20 minutes. Our viewers, many of them get in touch with us every single week, expressing frustration, expressing sadness, not just about the pandemic and what's happened with the energy shock because of Ukraine, but about how they feel about our country. And I just want to put some of their comments to you, and I'd like you to address them directly. Julian has said, why isn't anything working in this country? It grieves me sorely to see the state this country has degenerated into. Michael's told us, why does my son's school not have enough money for glue sticks? Why do I have potholes on almost every road I drive on? Why can't I get a doctor's appointment? Why are beaches and rivers polluted beyond measure? And Sheila says, our biggest worry is not about tax, it's about having the basics. Can you say to our viewers this morning that you can do anything about how they feel? Do you understand it?
Yes, of course I do. And my first answer to you, I acknowledge the frustration that people felt. Of course it's been very difficult. When inflation rises to the highest level that we've seen in decades, when energy bills double because of a war in Ukraine, of course that has an impact on Sheila and everyone else. And that's why I'm working so hard to deliver people financial security. And I do think it is about tax, because people are working very, very hard. And I want them to be able to keep more of their money so that they can spend that on their families in the way that they want. And we've now been able to start doing that after a difficult few years, which is very positive. So everyone in work on average is receiving a £900 tax cut. And if we're re-elected, we will continue to cut taxes for people at every stage of their lives, giving them the financial security that they rightly want and deserve after what has been a difficult few years. And what I don't want, none of those things are going to be made any easier by a Labour government that would whack up everyone's taxes by thousands of pounds. That's not going to help Sheila or anybody else, and I don't want to see that happen.
But this is about what's changed over the long term. And Sheila says your government has just not been delivering the basics. People feel you've not delivered the basics, and you're asking for another 5 years.
Again, Laura, you said you didn't want to trade statistics, right?
I'm telling you what our viewers are telling us.
And this election is about the future. And if people want more financial security so that they can spend the money on the things that they want to provide a better life for their family, that's what I will deliver. We'll continue cutting taxes for everyone in work. We'll continue cutting taxes for those who are self-employed, setting up their own businesses, taking that risk. For young couples who want to buy their first home, we will abolish stamp duty effectively for first-time buyers. And for millions of pensioners who have worked hard all their lives, I want to make sure they have security in retirement. So they will have the triple lock plus, which will mean that we raise the allowance for pensioners. Again, that won't be matched by the Labour Party. So for the first time in our country's history, pensioners face paying a retirement tax on the state pension. And these are the choices that are ahead of people at this election, which is why it's so important.
On that particular issue, we've pointed out to our viewers before, you're promising to undo something that the Conservatives were already planning to do. And our viewers also are very aware that taxes have been at an absolutely record level. So you may be promising that now, but people have really felt the pain because of successive tax rises that your party has brought in. And
can I just address that? Well, you've made the point, so let me just address that. We had a pandemic, right? And I was on your show many times talking about the support that we were providing to the NHS for the vaccine with furlough. Then we had a war in Ukraine. Again, I was on your show and you were saying, well, what support are you providing to people? At the time, not a single person disagreed with that support. Very very understandably, we have to pay that back. That's why I took the difficult decisions that I did. I was upfront about it at the time. That's what leadership looks like. But now we are cutting taxes, undeniably cutting taxes for people. This election is about the future. I will continue to cut taxes for people, including pensioners. And you talk about the tax burden. Under the forecast by independent experts, the tax burden under a future Labour government is forecast to rise to the highest level in our nation's history. So if people are worried about, as you say, if people are, you've brought up the tax burden, if the tax burden is a question at this election, independent forecasts show that under Labour it will rise to the highest level in our country's history. So that's the choice. If taxes are an issue that people are concerned about, they will go up under the Labour Party, they will go down under the Conservatives.
And I will say to you, Prime Minister, the same as I've said to every politician during this campaign, is our voters have been very clear with us. They want our politicians to answer questions about their plans and their policy rather than trying to attack the other side, which is understandable as a politician, but I'll say the same to you as I have to every other politician.
I think it's reasonable to point out the difference in the choice.
And you've done that. And you've done that. But when it comes, though, to your statement, as you've repeatedly said, that elections are about the future, of course they're about the future, but they are also about your record and your party's long-term record. You had a successful career in business before you became a politician. I don't think you'd have hired anybody without checking out their references or looking at their CV.
Yes, and I've been Prime Minister for 18 months. And during that time, inflation has come down, as I said it would, from 11% back to target. The economy is growing faster than our competitors. Wages are rising, energy bills are falling, taxes are being cut. My primary job when I took on this role was to deliver that economic stability. We have done that, and that's why people can trust that we will continue to cut their taxes and give them the financial security that they crave. But also, in that 18 months, we've made important strides in investing more in our security, because the world is a more dangerous place than it ever has been.
And we're going to come on to that in a second.
There's a choice. OK, well, I'm happy to talk about that.
We're going to come on to that in a second, and we were just talking to Pat McFadden from the Labour Party about their position on defence, and we'll come to that in a second. But in the longer term, there have been such changes and challenges in this country, but there also have been very, very significant events around the world. But the long-term political choices that the UK has made, including leaving the EU, has made more difficulty for our economy. And your old bosses at Goldman Sachs say plainly, in the long term, Brexit has meant the UK is notably underperforming compared to other economies. Is your old boss wrong?
No, well, we had a referendum. The British people made a choice. I was proud to support Brexit. It's the right thing for our country. And actually, what you're now seeing this year, our economy growing faster than every one of our major competitors. And actually, we have now overtaken the Netherlands, France, Japan to become the fourth largest export economy in the world. Thanks to the freedoms we have as a result of Brexit, we're able to regulate and cut red tape in a way that supports growth and investment, and do so in places around the country like Teesside, creating free ports that are making a big difference to people.
But this is about the long term. Goldman Sachs and the Office for Budget Responsibility, the independent government watchdog on these things, says that trade will be much lower in the long term because we've left the EU, rightly or wrongly, and it was a political choice that the people made. But do you accept, in fact, as one of your own ministers, Kevin Hollingrake, said this week, that leaving the EU has made things more difficult for many businesses? There he is, your close colleague who's been defending you on the airwaves in the last few weeks. There's no doubt for some businesses it is more difficult. That's the reality. Is he wrong?
No, of course. When you leave the single market and the customs union, that is going to change our trading relationships.
So of course it's more difficult.
Of course that changes your trading relationships.
It's more difficult.
But we have the most deepest bilateral free trade agreement with the European continent that any nation has anywhere around the world. And as I've just said, because of the freedoms we have, the ability to sign trade deals with far faster growing parts of the economy around the world, like Asia, we have now overtaken France, Japan, the Netherlands to become the fourth largest export economy in the world. And I meet businesses all the time that are taking advantage of those new opportunities and creating jobs in their areas, selling to these fast-growing markets around the world. And long-term for this economy, that's the right thing to do. If you look at where global growth is going to come from over the next 10, 20, 30 years, it's going to come from those places. And it's right that we have the independence to link ourselves to the fastest-growing parts of the world and take advantage of the freedoms we have when it comes to regulating growth industries like technology, like AI, like financial services, which allow us to be more competitive than Europe. So I come from a business background. I'm highly confident that actually, in the right hands, by the way, we will do that. Now, the choice for people is, if they want to reverse that with Labour, that's what they'll get. Keir Starmer's been very clear that he wants to do some kind of deal with the EU, which will mean accepting some form of free movement of people. I don't think that's right when we want to bring immigration down.
Denied it. We've talked to Pat McFadden about that, and he has just denied that. I just do want to make clear to our viewers that the trade deals you talk about, the vast majority of them were rollovers from deals we already had with the EU, and the US is not at this stage interested in a trade deal, even though that was one of the big promises of Brexit.
And Laura, but you just hang on. You're going to say that. You haven't mentioned we're the first European nation to join the CPTPP trade deal, which is some of the fastest growing economies.
It's not yet in force.
It's accepted and just needs to be passed in Parliament. That's a big moment. That is a big moment. That's one of the fastest growing parts of the world. We were negotiating very closely with India, and I'm confident that we will be the first European country, again, under a Conservative government, if we're re-elected, to negotiate a trade deal that's deep with India, which, again, is one of the fastest growing parts of the world. That's the right priority for the British economy. I don't think it's right for Labour to end up re-accepting EU rules that we have no say over and accept some freedom of people, movement of people when we want to get immigration down.
And I'll remind you, as I have every politician in the last 6 weeks, that our viewers want us to stick to the party's policy of the person who is sitting in the chair, with respect. But there is plenty of evidence, even from your own minister in the last few days, that the economic reality of Brexit is that the UK's standing long term is more challenging than had we stayed in the EU. And you promised control of immigration, which many voters thought would mean immigration would come down when we left the EU. And of course, until very recently, it was going up and up and up. And another promise that seems to have gone by the wayside is the kind of bold commitment that your old boss, Boris Johnson, used to make when it comes to climate change. Now, at your party's conference this year, you shifted tack and you shifted the rhetoric. But some people believe, including the Independent Climate Change Committee, it means that the UK's lost its status as a leader. Was that a mistake?
No, and actually you started that question with something that I fundamentally disagree with. Because of Brexit, we've lost our standing in the world.
That's not what I said. I said there's lots of economic evidence which is true. There are many economists who say...
You said we've lost our standing in the world. That is completely and utterly wrong.
Well, that's not what I said, Prime Minister.
We've just had a visit from the Japanese. Last year, we signed the Hiroshima Accords with Japan, unequivocally Japan stating that we are their closest ally in Europe. We're building a new generation of nuclear submarines with Australia and America. Never happened before that we have shared technology on that scale. We've negotiated the Windsor Framework with the EU, restored government in Northern Ireland, joined the CPTPP trade deal, and we are leading the world and leading in NATO when it comes to supporting Ukraine, investing more in defence, standing tall with our allies. People are queuing up to work with us because they respect what we do. So I just completely reject that. It's entirely wrong, this kind of declinist narrative that people have of the UK. I wholeheartedly reject.
When it comes to climate change...
I'm very happy to talk about climate change.
There are people in your own party, some people have resigned over it, who say that the decisions that you made to shift the approach on climate change has caused the UK's reputation in that area, which was world-leading, to fall back.
No, I don't think British families should solve a global problem all by themselves. We've decarbonised faster than any major economy. So we've cut emissions in our country by 50%. What have they done in the EU? 30%. What have they done in the US? 0. What have they done in China? Well, they're up 2 or 3 times. So where's the lack of leadership there? Look at our 2030 targets. Again, more ambitious than the EU, more ambitious than Japan, more ambitious than America. All this nonsense that we're not leading in the world. We're doing far more than anyone else, which is why I made the changes I did. Because I don't think it's right to saddle British families with thousands of pounds of extra costs to switch out their car, their boiler, convert their home, when we don't need to do that. No one else is doing that. I think that is the practical, sensible thing to do.
But it is having practical effects. Listen, the boss of Stellantis, who makes Vauxhall, Citroën and Peugeot cars, they're talking about pulling out of UK production because of the delay on making electric vehicles compulsory. The boss said this week, we've undertaken big investments, but if this market becomes hostile, we'll look at producing elsewhere.
Well, hang on. We've seen billions of pounds of investment into our auto industry from Nissan, into Sunderland, where I was at the plant, making a new generation of electric vehicles there, and from JLR, again, making their new platform of electric vehicles and gigafactories. Again, this kind of declinist narrative is total nonsense.
This isn't a declinist narrative.
No,
this
we've
is
attracted
a senior business figure expressing hesitation because of your decisions.
Well, what you haven't mentioned, though, is our two largest auto companies in the UK, both under our leadership in the last 6 to 8 months, have announced billions of pounds more investment, securing the future of their plants in this country and making the transition to electric vehicles. Right, you've picked one quote when the two largest producers of cars in our country are investing
more. It's the boss of 3 big car companies.
Right,
I want to move on to talk about another
JLR and Nissan are our 2 biggest car manufacturers in this country. They're both investing billions and said the future of electric vehicles are happening here in this country. Well, but look, to your point, right, I don't think we need to saddle British families with thousands of pounds of extra costs when other countries aren't doing anywhere near the same thing, and it's not necessary. Now, that's a clear choice for people at this election, right? They may not like that, but I don't think it's right. It costs £10,000 in a typical terrace house to change your boiler. It costs £8,000 in a typical semi-detached house to convert your energy. And again, to change your car years before anyone is saying that is necessary, I don't think it's right. So yes, I did make those changes. They will all be reversed under a future Labour government, and that's a choice for people. A sensible approach to net zero with me that saves you money, thousands of pounds of extra costs with the Labour Party.
And you've made that point. Now, climate change, of course, isn't the only threat to what some people see as a big threat to global security. You've warned recently, we've heard it from the NATO boss here on our programme as well, about the threat from what's been described as an axis of authoritarian states. Your Defence Secretary said we are in a pre-war world. If that's what you believe, why didn't you give the Defence Secretary what he wanted, which was 3% of GDP to go on defence spending?
No, that's simply not right. We were investing more in our defence, up to 2.5% of GDP. I announced that, actually talking about the axis of authoritarian states, Russia, Iran, China and North Korea. That's why it's right to invest more in defence. It's right that we do that in a sensible way, because actually we need to build our defence industrial capability to handle the increased investment so we can produce more at home, because that's what the Ukraine war has shown, that we need to invest more in our munitions and stockpiles and UK manufacturing. We're doing that, and the Armed Forces and the Defence Secretary are delighted with what we're doing. And again, the choice for people is very clear. We can have more investment in our defence with a Conservative government, or as Keir Starmer's been crystal clear, the NATO summit is literally days after the election. If Keir Starmer's Prime Minister, he will go to that NATO summit and reverse the UK government's plans to increase defence spending.
Can hear that they don't want politicians talking this morning to continually return to attacking their opponents, but you are spending less on defence than you were in 2010 in today's prices. Over 14 years of Conservative government, you're spending less today than you were in 2010, even though you and your Defence Secretary have made all sorts of very serious warnings about the threats in the world right now.
And the threats have changed. I mean, the threats have changed. The world today is very different to what it was 14 years ago. And that's the thing. You've got Russia, Iran, North Korea and China increasingly working together. You just saw Russia and North Korea sitting down together last week or the other week.
So if the threats are greater, why are you spending less in real terms than you were in 2010?
We've been increasing defence spending since 2020 when I was Chancellor, and we announced the largest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. That happened when I was Chancellor. We're now building on that. And the choice for people at this election is very clear. If you think the world is dangerous, as I do, if you think we need to invest more in our defence to keep everyone at home safe,
you've made that point.
Well, this is an important point. This is our country's
And
security.
you've made it already, and there are other subjects that we want to get to.
There is an important point here, because this also sends a signal to our adversaries, right? We actually have strength by demonstrating to our adversaries that we're able to invest in our security, not just today, but for the long term. And that's what our plans do. They send a signal to Putin that we're not going anywhere, that we will be able to continue supporting Ukraine for years into the future if necessary. But that is not something that the Labour Party can say, because they won't make plans to increase defence spending.
You also say that you're going to pay for this increase in defence spending by getting rid of civil servants, which is a promise I've heard politicians more times say than I've had hot dinners. But I want to move on to other subjects because they're important things that happen.
Seeing as you've just made that point, I should have the chance to address it. Yes, you may have heard that in the past. The difference this time is we've had a massive expansion of civil servants since the pandemic to deal with that, which was reasonable at the time, but it's not reasonable as a permanent state of affairs. And actually, I do think it's entirely clear that we can reduce the civil service not by a huge amount, but just back to its pre-pandemic levels, which I think were entirely reasonable. The Treasury's conducted a full analysis of how that will happen. The Chancellor announced it in the autumn. The plans were finalised in the spring. That, together with the planned increase in R&D, fully funds the increase in defence investment.
Let's move on.
But again, the choice is clear. If you believe the world is dangerous, we are the only ones that will invest more in our defence.
And you've said that repeatedly, Prime Minister, and there are important things that our viewers want us to ask you about alongside that. Was it a mistake at the start of this campaign for you to say you had respect for Nigel Farage?
No. There are views of his that he's been right to highlight, and I've said that in the past, right? And where I agree with someone's policies, I'll happily say that. But what happened the other day was wrong, and I was keen to call it out. And more generally, I'd say to everybody, as I said right at the beginning of this campaign, a vote for anyone who's not a Conservative candidate in this election just makes it more likely that Keir Starmer is in number 10. So if you want your taxes cut, your pension protected, our borders secure, immigration coming down, and a sensible approach to net zero, you are only going to get that if you vote for a Conservative candidate.
But on Friday, you showed understandable and genuine anger about what had been said about you, incredibly offensive, vile slurs by an activist who said he was linked to the Reform Party. It was a big deal for you as a Prime Minister in 2024 to repeat that language, to highlight the point. Why did you decide to do that?
Look, I think anyone who comes into politics is ready to accept a degree of criticism, right? That comes with the territory, and that's fine. But in this instance, what was said was deeply inappropriate and racist, and I did it deliberately. I hated doing it, but I thought it was important to say it, to call out what it was, and that's why I did what I did. And I think the vast majority of these people in our country rightly believe that it's not the colour of your skin or your background or your gender that defines who you are. The fact that I'm the first British Asian Prime Minister, as you said at the beginning of the segment, is a wonderful thing, but also it's wonderful that it wasn't a big deal. And that's what's so special about our country. I don't think my story would be possible anywhere else, but we can't let the views of a minority run licence like that, and I wanted to call them out, not just for me and my family, but for everyone who's experienced racism like that. They were absolutely wrong, and they deserve to be called out, and that's why I said what I said.
Can you believe you felt you had to do that in 2024?
Yeah, look, of course that's sad, but I'd also say we've made enormous progress as a country. I'm sitting here as living proof of the progress we've made as a country, and I'd say my story I don't think would be possible almost anywhere else, and we are the most successful multi-faith, multi-ethnic democracy anywhere in the world. That should be a sense of give us a source of enormous strength and pride for our country, and that's why views like this are so damaging and so wrong. They belong to a minority of people, and they deserve to be called out for what they are, and that's what I did.
And we had a really strong response from our viewers on what happened, and the vast majority of people were appalled. But I just want to show you what somebody, Ime, who told us he was a black man, wrote in to say. He told us, "I was appalled at the way that Sunak was described. However, to me, his stance on racism hasn't been completely zero tolerance." And he wanted us to ask you, why did you refuse to return the money of a Conservative Party donor, Frank Hester, who was accused of making racist remarks about Diane Abbott? Why?
Yeah, at the time, I called out those remarks as racist. Frank Hester apologised, expressed genuine contrition about what happened, and I think it's reasonable when someone is genuinely contrite about what's happened, accepts what they've done is wrong, then that apology is accepted.
So it was okay to take his money because he said sorry, and then to take more money from him, even though he made what took you a day or two to say were racist remarks.
Nigel Farage has just described these comments as inappropriate. They're not inappropriate, they were vile and racist and wrong, but he's only said that they're inappropriate. The person who made them has only apologised to the Reform Party for the impact it's had on them. There's a very clear difference there. There's no contrition or remorse or acceptance of what's happened in that case.
So it was okay to take Frank Hester's money and then to take more money because he apologised after being caught. Ime might wonder if the money was more important than your values.
No, because when someone apologises and shows genuine contrition, that should be accepted. And actually, the comments were about Diane Abbott, as you know. They were wrong. I said that they were racist at the time. Diane Abbott herself has also made comments which were wrong and apologised and was re-accepted back into the Labour Party. So I do think it's reasonable when people make mistakes, if they're genuinely upfront and accept that they've made mistakes, they apologise and are genuinely contrite about it, then those apologies should be accepted. That happened in the case of Frank Hester. That happened in the case of Diane Abbott herself, as she was re-accepted back into the Labour Party.
You just mentioned mistakes there, and we've been asking our politicians about mistakes this morning. When was the last time you were wrong?
Well, I talk to my wife and my daughters. They say on a very regular basis. But this campaign is something that I am proud of, right? And that's what we're here to talk about.
After everything, you're proud of the campaign?
Yes, I am. Because this campaign has shone a spotlight on the fact that a Labour government is going to raise everyone's taxes, and they're not being straight with everyone about it. And I'm proud that we've put that on the table and people are aware of that, and they should be, because there's a few days left before everyone makes up their mind. And actually, there's a clear choice. And I've been very clear throughout this campaign about the risk that a Labour government poses, not just to our borders and our security and people's pensions, but to everyone's finances. I don't want people to surrender all those things to the Labour Party. I don't want their taxes to go up. And this campaign is rightly focused on that. And as you saw in the debate, your debate just the other day, you were there, Keir Starmer just can't say to people what he's going to do to control immigration. He can't be straight with people that their taxes are going up.
Are you proud of leaving the D-Day commemorations early? Are you proud that some people in your party are being looked at by the Gambling Commission for having a punt on the date of the election? One of your closest aides has admitted a big error of judgment. You're proud of your campaign?
Yeah, well, I've been very clear when it comes to gambling. I was appalled to learn of these allegations. Absolutely appalled. I was furious to think that anyone might have cheated. That's the opposite of what I think public service means. And I've been crystal clear where we've conducted our own internal inquiries, have suspended two candidates, and if anyone is found to have broken the rules, they should face the full consequences of the law, and I will boot them out of the Conservative Party.
And will you tell us the last time that you were wrong? Margaret Thatcher couldn't think of a single occasion to David Frost.
There'll be plenty of times, and as I said, on a daily basis, of people saying that I get things wrong, as you can read about. But look, this campaign is about the future. There are a few days left, and there's a very important choice for people. I understand people's frustrations. I get that. With me, with the party, we all make mistakes. I've been open about that, and we haven't got everything right and made the progress that we would have liked. But this is not a by-election. It's a choice about who you want to govern this country, not just for 5 years, but potentially longer. You have to think about what that means for you. If you want to have your taxes cut, migration controlled, your pension protected, only I and the Conservatives are going to do that for you.
And you've made that. Do you think you're going to be Prime Minister still on Friday?
Yes. I'm fighting very hard, and I think people are waking up to the real danger of what a Labour government means. I don't want people to surrender their pension, their finances, our borders, their security to a Labour government. That's the choice for people at this election, and there are days left for people to realise what it will mean for them and their families. I don't think people can afford thousands of pounds of tax rises, and I think that will resonate with people.
Prime Minister, thank you very much indeed for coming in to see us in the studio this morning. Well, what did you think of what Rishi Sunak had to say to you, to all of us this morning? You can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk as ever, or if you're social media inclined, use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and we will share some of your thoughts at the end of the show to give you the last say. And the headlines are on the BBC Live page as it unfolds, and the address is there for you now. Hugh, let's start with you, because you wanted us to raise climate change. What did you think of what Rishi Sunak had to say?
Well, I thought that was quite a tetchy performance from the Prime Minister, and at his most tetchy when you mention net zero. And he's going back to the same story of rolling back on his government's commitments, using the reason that he doesn't want the burden to fall on the most vulnerable in society in terms of the transition. But it's a matter of government policy who bears the brunt of the urgent transition to a greener economy and a greener energy system. And it doesn't have to fall on the most vulnerable in society. And that's why the Green Party would go for a carbon tax, which would finance that without.
And we'll talk about the Greens in a bit more detail in a second. But Brandon, how did you think of how he handled that? I mean, the record is, we know that the country is grumpy. We know a lot of things have gone wrong. Do you think he can manage to escape from that, from what you heard?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a few days left. The polls are very clear. We can't deny what the polls are showing, and having that consistency of the polls means this is a very challenging week for us. But there are still a lot of seats around the country when you dig into that polling where the margins are quite narrow. And I think what people will hopefully see with what the Prime Minister outlined today is someone who's fighting for every single vote, making the case what the future Conservative government that he wants to lead can do for people, how it will make people's lives better, more cost effective for them, as opposed to a bit of a blank page we're seeing from Labour, and potentially a very expensive one as well.
But do you think now he seems to be in more sort of fighting spirit? We saw that in the debate on Wednesday. We saw it with how he responded to those racist slurs. And at the beginning of the campaign, he was often accused of being sort of a bit robotic. So has he done himself a disservice by keeping his sort of spirit to the end?
Well, look, I think people are seeing some somebody who feels very strongly about wanting to do the right thing for people. And look, what he said is right. Harriet and Hugh, no doubt as well, and we've all had that experience in the past where the sort of personal attacks you get in politics now, I think, are a risk for politics more generally. We've got to be conscious of that. It comes back to this social media point I made earlier. It's changing the dynamics of how people engage. I think he's right to call that out, as have others. And we've got to be, I think, as a nation and as a country, we've got to be conscious of what we do, because if we want the best public servants, we've got to give them some respect, because one thing all of us have in common, I would argue, across all parties, we might disagree on how to do things, but we all want to make our country better.
And I want to bring Harriet in a sec, but Brandon, do you agree that he hasn't made any mistakes?
Well, I have to say there have been points in this campaign that, you know, you mentioned the gambling thing. I'm sure he will look back on that and think there were things that people could have done better.
And to be fair, he didn't say there hadn't been any mistakes in the campaign, but he said he was proud of it. Harriet, how do you think that he got on? I mean, what did you make of what he had to say?
Well, in relation to the future, is that I think people want stability. And, you know, he's the third Prime Minister since the last general election. They want stability, whether they're investors or whether they're our foreign allies. And they just, you know, they want an end to the chaos that there's been in government. And he was very tetchy when asked about the past. And I know that he's got thundering in his ears, the kind of hooves of the four horsemen of the Tory apocalypse, which is austerity, Brexit, Partygate, Liz Truss. You know, that is what is people's experience of the government. So that's why he doesn't want to talk about the past. He wants to talk about the future, but for the future, people want an end to chaos. They want stability.
Doesn't he have a point, though, when he does return to saying that Keir Starmer hasn't been as explicit as he might have been on issues like the relationship with the EU, on issues like defence spending, for example? Labour is not offering to be as generous as the Conservatives are.
We've been very clear on defence, absolutely strong about NATO, national security is the #1 priority, a strategic defence review and a commitment to 2.5. So, you know, there's this kind of undertone, you haven't been clear, but the truth is we have. And I think...
Or maybe it's just that in campaigns, actually, politicians are never crystal clear because they don't want to be held to everything afterwards.
But we are clear about what we can commit to, and then we say what our aspirations are. And I think I just got the feeling with Rishi Sunak, and I know I shouldn't be complacent because we have got a mountain to climb, but it just feels that, you know, people are done with what the Tories have actually delivered for them and their families over the last 14 years.
Is that true, Brandon?
No, I think over the last 40 years, there's a huge amount of things I'm hugely proud of that we have done, and the things I've worked on as a minister and colleagues across a long period of time. There's no getting away from the fact that through the COVID period, with Ukraine, with the war in the Middle East, this has been a challenging few years, and the impact that has on our economy and people's daily lives. And that's also why it's important to be talking about and outlining what the next government will do. I think people will vote for people when they can see what they're going to do that makes their lives better.
OK, well, it's not all, of course, about the battle between the red and the blue. Let's take a look at what your party, Hugh, and even you have been up to on the campaign trail.
We're the ones that will stop the water companies continuing to profit. We are offering hope.
The Greens are suggesting raising taxes, so do you want to tell us about this?
Yes, on those with the broadest shoulders who can most afford it.
It says the Green Party will therefore use rationing to reduce the amounts of meat and dairy food.
I don't think rationing is going to be in our manifesto for the next 5 years.
Well, Hugh, there you are. I mean, talk about campaigning, that's going the full hog. Do you feel that the Greens might actually make a big breakthrough this time? We know they're targeting 4 seats.
Yeah,
particularly.
Especially 4 seats. I've visited 3 of them in person. You saw me in the river there. That was the River Wye in North Herefordshire. A fantastic candidate there, Ellie Chowns.
And all candidates are available on the BBC website. We don't like to give individual plugs.
OK, well, let me just say that there are 4 extreme... let me take this opportunity to also pay tribute to Caroline Lucas, because she has been a fantastic contributor to Parliament. If we can get 4 more like her in the next Parliament, that's going to be more than 4 times as good.
And Caroline, for people who don't know, is the MP for Brighton Pavilion. She's standing down this time, but the Greens are hoping to hold on to that seat.
Sian Berry will hold on to that seat triumphantly, I'm sure. And you know, Caroline's had a Brighton stick of rock with the word integrity written all the way through it. She's made a fantastic contribution, and 4 Green MPs could make an even bigger one. So I'm very excited. I've been really enjoying being out on the campaign trail. I'm wearing the flowery shirt of optimism here today. We're going to see a Labour government at the end of next week.
Well, no one knows that yet.
Well, I think it's pretty much a certainty. I mean, since the betting scandal, all the main bookmakers, you can't get even money on the Tories getting more than 100 seats from Ladbrokes or Paddy Power. I think that's quite telling. But let's get back to Green Party politics, because I think it's very exciting to have a group who are going to properly press Labour to do the right thing about the environment and be bolder. I think we need to be bold in how we raise money to do this. It's the issue that's been widely pointed out, the conspiracy of silence from both parties on how they're going to pay for the changes that we need to see.
Do you think that the people are really up for what the Green Party is putting on the table, paying significantly more tax if you're lucky enough to be at the top end of the spectrum? Very significant changes to things, making it harder, more expensive for people to fly, in terms of having, going off for family holidays. In terms, it's not in the manifesto for now, but there was a proposal in your policy to have rationing on meat and dairy.
You keep coming back to that. As Adrian correctly said, there is no rationing of anything in the Green Party manifesto. But I think people are excited about a transition to a greener economy, and they understand that it takes really bold policies to achieve that. And, Labour's just diluted and diluted and diluted their offer to the public, not just, by the way, on green policies, but on how they're going to deliver reforms to frontline services, which now sounds like essentially managed decline. And also this very, very dodgy, I would say, saying that it's going to be paid for by growing the economy, by GDP growth. We might have to wait a long time before Labour's got enough in its coffers to have any real change that will make a difference to the NHS, to housing, to insulating homes. That's an incredibly urgent thing that needs to be done.
OK, well, just as we have done with the politicians, I'm going to say that we want to talk about the party you support, not just attacking the rivals. But it's interesting to hear your views on what it's been like being on the campaign trail. Do you ever fancy swapping the kitchen for Parliament?
I've really enjoyed being out on the campaign trail. I'm not
that's a maybe. Harriet's eyebrows are shooting to the river ahead.
I enjoy the privileged position I have of being invited to opportunities like this to comment on what everybody's up to. I have been a campaigner on the environment for many, many years, and also for health. So I do a lot of research into these areas, and I look forward to a government pressed by some excellent Green MPs to make brilliant changes on food and farming and on the environment.
I think that's a maybe. Maybe there'll be a constituency for the River Cottage. Anyway, Hugh, very interesting to hear about your time on the campaign trail. Well, the context of all the conversations, as Hugh was just alluding to, is a thumping poll lead for the Labour Party. Arguably, polling, for good or ill, has shaped much of this campaign. But has there been much point in all the politicians chasing around the country then, if going into Thursday the position is essentially stubbornly stuck? Who better to ask than Sir John Curtis? Here's his final 60 seconds on Sunday.
There's been better news for the Conservatives this week. Their support has stopped falling. But Rishi Sunak's party on 20% still trails Labour on 40% by 20 points, exactly the same as at the start of the election. The rise in Reform supporters also come to a halt, but at 17%, the party is still winning over 1 in 4 2019 Tory voters. And Rishi Sunak's personal ratings are clearly worse than Keir Starmer's. Meanwhile, the mega polls still suggest Conservative support is down most on 2019 in constituencies the party is defending. And as a result, these polls on average put the party on just 100 seats, while Labour could win a record 450. The Liberal Democrats could get around 50, the SNP 18, Reform 7, and the Greens 2. But there are still 4 days to go.
Well, forget about the blue and red team for a second. This election could, as John was saying, see a really good combined performance for the smaller political parties. The Lib Dems, when they haven't been busy with campaigning stunts, have been knocking on doors in the hope of picking up dozens of seats, mainly trying to nab them from Conservatives in more affluent areas. Daisy Cooper is their deputy leader, and she is here. But let's have a bit of a look at their eventful campaign. People watch what you're doing and they think you're not really taking this seriously.
We're taking the voters' concerns really seriously.
Come on, my sweetheart, come on.
This is a manifesto to save the NHS.
Well, Daisy Cooper, we're not going to begin by asking you why you've done all those campaign states, because the reason is to get people to talk about them, and that has proven to be a success throughout this campaign. So let's talk about some of the issues. Let's talk about immigration. So During the ITV debate, when you were asked as the Lib Dem representative if you thought immigration is too high, you put your hand up. We can show people the picture of what happened. Why do you think it's too high?
Well, I think immigration is forecast to come down anyway, but one of our manifesto pledges is around having a higher minimum wage for care workers. And part of the reason for this is that in the last financial year, 105,000 visas were given to care workers. And this is because the Conservative government have not invested in our domestic workforce. And because they haven't done that, we've had to bring in people from abroad. Now, when people come here...
Is that why immigration is too high? Because we've got too many care workers from abroad?
Look, when people come here and they look after our loved ones, I think we should welcome them with open arms. But we need to have a sensible debate in this country about our economy and about the workforce that we need. And we believe that when it comes to our health and social care, for example, and in fact every other sector in our economy, you start by looking at the skills that you need, you develop a skills strategy for your domestic workforce, and then when you can't get the skills here, you should get them from abroad.
But why do you think immigration is too high? You put your hand up at that ITV debate.
Well, I think one of the reasons it's going to come down anyway, but the reason why immigration is so high at the moment...
No, why is it too high? That's my question. You're explaining why it's so high, in your view. Why do you, as a Liberal Democrat, who often are very supportive of immigration, believe it is too high?
Well, because we're not investing in our domestic workforce. And if we invested in our domestic workforce, then we wouldn't need to have quite so many people coming here to do the jobs that they are doing. When they do come here, we should welcome them. Our NHS and social care would be on the floor. They'd be on its knees without people coming here from around the world.
So
but we have got to invest in our domestic workforce, as well as welcoming those who come here to look after our loved ones.
You've said it's too high, and that means we've got too many people coming here from abroad, and you'd rather British workers were providing those jobs. What would be an appropriate level of immigration then to you? Our viewers will know legal migration has been over 600,000. It is forecast to come down, but what level would you like to see it at?
So we don't think there should be an artificial cap and these kind of really unhelpful salary floors that the government have put in place. We need to work with every single sector to work out what level of immigration they need. At the moment, we have the worst of both worlds. I know from my own area, you've got hospitality industry, you have the NHS, you've got social care, engineering. They cannot get the people that they need, either from the UK or from abroad. So we need to have that skills programme to make sure we can get a bit of both.
But people do want to know, when you say you think immigration is too high, what level would then be the right one?
Look, I don't think you can put artificial caps in place. If you want to have a dynamic economy, you need to have a dynamic immigration policy. And that's why we're the only party, we're the only party talking about a higher minimum wage for care workers, £2 higher than the current minimum wage, so that we can attract people back into the care sector, attract a lot more people to become carers in the first place, and that would then naturally reduce the number of people that we would need to ask to come here from abroad.
So you do want immigration to fall?
Well, immigration is forecast to fall anyway.
But what do you want to see? This is what people want to know at a time like this. You're asking them to put a cross in the box. Labour doesn't really want to put an arbitrary cap on either, but previously they've said around 200,000 would be a normal level. The Conservatives also have said that Parliament would vote every year if they win to put a cap on it. What number would you like to see, or what proportion of a fall would you like to see? People want to know.
We're not going to put an artificial number or cap on this. What really matters is that you have to work with every single sector in the economy to say, what do you need? What skills do you need? What staff do you need? You put a skills plan in place so that you can train up your domestic workforce. We've got some fantastic policies in our manifesto about giving people a lifetime skills account so they can retrain and upskill throughout their lifetime. But as well as doing that, where there are gaps, we should bring people in from abroad, but it has to be dynamic.
Do you accept that if you fulfil your long-term goal of rejoining the EU single market, that big trading bloc, that would mean freedom of movement, which would mean that any government can't control how many people come here legally?
Well, let's be really clear. Immigration now is significantly higher than it was when we were in the EU. But let's be also very clear about the fact that the single market is not on the table at the moment. The EU has not put it on the table.
But it's your long-term goal.
It's a long-term goal, but it's not on the table in this general election. What is on the table in this general election is a party, the Liberal Democrats, who want to renegotiate that botched Brexit deal that has allowed the government to effectively undercut our farmers and wrap up our small businesses with red tape. We are absolutely committed to renegotiating that botched Brexit deal to make it work for our small businesses and to have a youth mobility scheme so that young people can once again work, travel and study abroad.
It's a bit like freedom of movement though, isn't it? Freedom of movement for young people.
Well, the youth mobility scheme would be up to the age of 35 and it would allow young people to move around Europe, and I think that would be a good thing to help rebuild some of the ties. OK, we've asked everybody this morning, so we'll ask you too. What's the one mistake you think your party's made? I think I've allowed Ed to do too many stunts and I haven't had enough of them myself.
So which is the one you'd have liked to do the most yourself? The water slide, the trampoline?
I should probably have bagged a space at Thorpe Park.
There, well, you heard it here first, Daisy Cooper. Maybe you've just about got time before the end of the campaign to go and have a go in a roller coaster. But thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio this morning. Well, the Lib Dems hope they will restore their position as the third biggest party in the Commons and grab that back from the SNP. The SNP's been campaigning hard in Scotland to hang on to their 43 seats in the Commons. But their main rivals are a resurgent Labour Party. But line one, page one of their manifesto is still Scottish independence.
On July the 4th, Independence Day, make sure your voice is heard.
1, 2, 3!
It's not migration is the problem, it's the fact that we need more people coming in.
Right, ending austerity.
Conspiracy of silence between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party.
Conspiracy of silence about the realities of their spending.
Conspiracy of silence.
Well, we can talk to Stephen Flynn, who is the party's leader at Westminster. Stephen, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, as we heard there in that short tape, your favourite tactic in this campaign has been to attack Labour and the Tories with that conspiracy of silence. Now, that was a criticism from the independent number crunchers, the IFS, saying that they're not telling the truth about all of their funding plans. But the IFS also has a go at your plans. They say your plans for independence would mean higher borrowing and either significant tax rises or spending cuts if Scotland was independent. What do you say to them on that?
Well, I think what we would, of course, initially say to that is that when we're looking at this general election, there is that conspiracy of silence. There's £18 billion worth of public sector cuts, which are agreed by both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. That's a choice that they are making at this election. We, of course, oppose that. We believe that there should be investment in our public services, investment in our NHS, and we need to get away from this race to the bottom on austerity that exists in Westminster. It doesn't work. It's broken the fabric of society over the course of the last 14 years. Why Keir Starmer would want to continue with that, knowing the damage it has caused, is beyond me. And that's why we need Scottish National Party MPs in Westminster putting Scotland's interests first. And when it comes to the IFS, I don't know if you noticed, Laura, but they also looked at the SNP manifesto and outlined that the £30 billion which we believe could go back into the Treasury, could be invested into public services as a result of rejoining our friends and neighbours in the European Union, was something which they deemed to be reasonable. Again, the Labour Party don't want to be in the single market, they don't want to be in the customs union, they don't want freedom of movement. We believe in something different, the SNP believes in something different, and that's why the people of Scotland should put their faith in us at this election.
And again, Stephen, as we have with all of our politicians this morning, our viewers want you to address our questions to you, not attack your other opponents, although you can try. The IFS, though, also says about your manifesto, they say you skirt around the issue. If you got independence as you desire, you would have much higher levels of borrowing. And again, they say if you get independence, which you so desire, you would have bigger borrowing and either significant tax rises or significant cuts.
Well, of course, if we were independent, we would be in a situation where we could seek to invest in our economy. We could seek to invest in the net zero transition and allow us to compete with all of those other countries across the world to use our resources for the benefit of the people of Scotland.
But
we'd be able to rejoin that European single market.
You're very happy to use the IFS to criticise your rivals with their independent and rigorous analysis. But when they turn the lens on your plans, you dismiss it. I mean, it sounds a bit, you're very happy to dish it out, but not to take it.
I'm not dismissing it at all. They're a respected institution, and I'm wholly aware of what they have said. What I'm outlining is how I believe we can do things better and how we can grow our economy. And the way we want to grow our economy is, of course, in stark contrast to the way that the Labour Party and the Conservative Party do at Westminster. As I said, we want to see that investment in net zero. We want to be part of the European single market. We believe, and I was listening to Daisy Cooper there, we believe that migration is unashamedly a good thing. Scotland has a declining working age population. We need more people to come and live and work in Scotland to boost our public sector, but also to allow our businesses to grow and to thrive. Not just our businesses, but our university sector as well, one of the best productivity lines within Scotland. The Westminster consensus on these issues is for that not to happen. Independence affords us the opportunity for that to happen. And when we look at austerity, when we look at Brexit, when we look at the cost of living crisis, all of those issues have been exacerbated or caused by decisions made in Westminster. We believe that decisions for Scotland should be made in Scotland by the people of Scotland. I think that's a good starting point. And ultimately, people in Scotland have a decision to make at this election. Do they want to send MPs down to Westminster who'll sit quietly behind Keir Starmer, or do they want to send MPs to Westminster who will stand up to Keir Starmer on austerity, on Brexit, on the cost of living crisis, and of course on big foreign policy issues like Gaza, where of course it was the SNP who have continued to lead the charge for a ceasefire and indeed the recognition of the Palestinian state.
OK, and we'll remind people that nobody knows for sure the result of the election. But Stephen, we've asked all our politicians this morning to be honest for a moment about the campaign. Can you tell us a mistake you think you've made?
I don't believe that I spent enough time in Germany with the Tartan Army. Because of the election campaign, I was cut down to just one day. I wanted to be there for the full 10, 11 days. So that was the biggest mistake we made. We should have carried me off to Germany for the duration.
Well, if only we could pass a law that said that Scotland would never have quite such adventures at the football that they did in the last couple of weeks. But Stephen Flynn, thank you very much indeed for joining us on our last Sunday morning of this campaign, when, as ever, as we go along, we have been checking the politicians' facts. Labour's Pat McFadden told us £300 off your energy bills is a good way of illustrating the benefit of transitioning to renewable energy. Now, most energy experts agree that the transition will, in the long run, be good for your bills, but they don't agree on exactly how much you might save. Savings depend on what might happen to the fossil fuel bills that you're replacing and how much decarbonisation costs. Both of those things are tricky to forecast. So, in other words, you can't be sure of those stats. Rishi Sunak told us he is undeniably cutting taxes, and he's offering another cut to the rate of national insurance. But he's also sticking by those plans to freeze the amount you can earn without paying any tax. Put it all together, it does mean less tax for average and higher earning employees, but it means more tax for the lowest earning. That's according to the independent analysts at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And of course, there's more information on all the facts and figures politicians have put forward in the campaign on our website. And there's tons of it there if you want to have a look. That is it, believe it or not, for our interviews during this campaign. Only a few days to go until we'll be here in this studio bringing you the election results. This is a glimpse of how the BBC used to do it.
At Alexandra Palace, Studios A and B had been taken over by the election teams. Before them lay one of the longest television transmissions made in this country.
Elections are a struggle for power, battles if you like, and this one was at a time of the Prime Minister's choosing. And our view is it's going to be a hung Parliament. This election is too close to call. Tony Blair is to be Prime Minister and a landslide is likely. It's going to be a hung Parliament with the Conservatives as the largest party. Laura, what do you make of it?
Well, David, if these numbers are correct, then Theresa May has played a high-risk political game and she appears she may have lost her gamble. I don't know whose idea it was to put her on the TV, but here we all are, years later. We're going to do something that I hope is going to work. We're going to flick a switch and show you this is how we're going to do it on Thursday night. There it worked, miraculously. And look who's miraculously here, Clive Myrie. Here we are.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi,
so
good to see you all.
Clive will be with us on Thursday night. We'll be together presenting the elections results programme. How are you preparing?
A lot of reading, a lot of boning up. Which is wonderful. It's just going to be an incredible night, isn't it? For a whole host of reasons. First of all, elections are amazing anyway. They just are. Secondly, no incumbent has won an election from being so far behind in the polls this close up to polling day. John Major, he was 30 plus points behind Labour running up to him calling the election, but the gap narrowed and narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. So for Rishi Sunak to pull it off would be amazing. But Labour have not won an election since 2005. They haven't been in power since 2010. In fact, the Queen passed away after 70 years on the throne with 15 Conservative prime ministers and 5 Labour prime ministers. It is something that Labour just do not do. They don't tend to win. So that will be amazing if Keir Starmer pulls it off.
Someone who knows that very well is Harriet Harman. Harriet, you were first elected back in 1982. How does it feel to you this time? And do you have memories of that first election where you stood?
Yes, I do. And, things are so different now. But I feel there's a real sense, I feel actually hope is literally on the street now. People are coming up to me and saying, are you going to be able to do it this time? So, I feel very, very hopeful about it, but nervous.
Keir Starmer's told you so many times, though, not to be complacent. You sound quite confident.
Absolutely. Well, no, we shouldn't be too confident. And if we get in, it's going to be very important that we don't do any celebrating, any triumphalism. There are big problems in the country. We've got to just crack on. So there's, I'm retiring, so I can be a bit light-hearted about it. But they will be deadly serious, elected on Thursday, on with the work on Friday. Meanwhile, I shall be celebrating.
And Brandon, what's it like when you're actually a candidate? When you get to just a couple of days before the election? You were part of David Cameron's incoming crew in 2010.
Yes, well, it's very different to doing it when you're not standing and retiring as well, I have to say. So,
you two both look like you're having a great time, can I just say?
Very relaxed.
Unlike Joe Biden, Brandon and I know when to go.
You went, yeah.
Ooh, do you think you should go? Do you think you should go?
Did I say that?
Well, hang on. You're a senior figure in the Labour movement, sister party of the Democrats. Do you think you should go?
I just think they need to sort it out and save the world and America and all of us from Trump.
Interesting to see. So, Brandon, what was it like?
Yeah, no, I will say, thinking back to 2010, those last few days, and actually in 2010 we didn't really. I had a seat that Labour held, wasn't necessarily expected to win it. Your heart is almost in your mouth every hour of every day for the last few days. And on the night, that moment when the poll, I just went through till 10 o'clock, knocking on doors in every election. That's how I work. But from 10 o'clock when the polls close until you start to get a sense at the count, yeah, there's nothing quite like that. As Clive said, whatever happens, election night is exhilarating. There's something about that buzz that can't touch anything else.
So you really do bang on doors all the way up till 10 o'clock?
I see. In a local election once, I can remember knocking up a house with 4 people at 10 to 10 who lived right by the polling station. We got them to vote. We won the seat by 3 votes.
I remember.
So it does make a difference.
It does make a difference. Hugh, what are you going to do on Thursday night?
I will actually be on another channel watching the results come in,
talking
about what that might mean for the environment. But I think we will see a change of government on Thursday. I think it's okay to be excited about that. Even a little celebratory, not triumphalist, I agree. And then we need to do everything we can to make sure that the next government does the right thing for the environment, for the right thing for food and farming, the right thing for our kids to make sure that they eat really well at school and learn really well, because they're going to be the ones who will soon be taking responsibility for the future of the country, and we owe it to them to give them everything that they need.
OK, well, all 3 of you, thank you so much for being with us. Clive, thank you for coming in on a special final Sunday of this election campaign. We'll remind everybody that there is no certainty about what the result will be. Never assume is the first rule of journalism, isn't it, Clive? But it is a real moment in terms of anticipating that history will be made whatever happens.
Absolutely. You can plot the night from the exit poll, 10 o'clock, first indication of where things might be going, get a sense then of the size of the swing perhaps, and that can be used to extrapolate what might go on further down the line. Then the first result, the first declaration, hopefully before midnight, give us something to talk about. Then there's a little bit more of a lull, and then it's a freight train. There all the results come in, and we should be able to call it one way or the other around about 4:30.
So plenty of excitement to come. Thank you for getting in touch too. We always want to give you the last word. Stephen said of Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister refuses to accept that public services are in a complete mess, and it feels like everything is broken. And he told us defence and freedom of movement are top issues. Labour has not got substance to say on those subjects. Sue said, I could have found Rishi's interview very persuasive if the Tories hadn't already had 14 years to deliver. Thank you very much indeed for getting in touch with us. We love reading your comments and suggestions for questions. They're often extremely good ones. A big thank you to all of my guests today and throughout this busy campaign. And most of all, of course, thank you for your company, especially in the last 5 weeks. We have endeavoured to raise the questions, check the facts and press for the answers from the politicians who are desperate for your votes. You know, in 2024, Britain doesn't always feel like a country content with itself. So much has happened, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, we've left the EU, 5 different prime ministers in less than 10 years and 3 different general elections in that time as well. Instability that we just are not used to. But soon it's your moment to have your vital say about where you want to go next. It is fast approaching. Everything you need to know is there for you across the BBC. You can watch back anything from our election specials on the iPlayer. And I hope very much that you will join me and Clive and our colleagues across the country here on BBC One on Thursday night. Whatever happens, your decisions will make history. And of course, I'll be back with you next Sunday, same time, same place.